Thank you so much for being here today. I feel like this is like the main event for today. And so obviously so much of what we've been talking about is AI in education, its impact, its evolution, and a lot of that conversation, right, has to do with your experience and how you're learning and evolving with this technology, as we all are. So we'll do some brief introductions, and then we'll get into the conversation. I'll start. My name is Craig Watkins. I wear a few different hats here at the university. Professor in the Moody College of Communication, where I teach and do research on sort of AI, human interactions with AI systems. I'm also one of the principal investigators for the Good Systems Grand Challenge, which is one of the sponsors of this program today. And then I also have the honor of serving as the executive director of the IC² Institute, which is currently involved in a number of different research projects related to AI. And so maybe what if we sort of go down the line here, Jaxsen, starting with you, sort of introduce yourself, your major, degree, field of interest, and then if you have one word that characterizes how you feel about or how you're thinking about AI these days, please share that with us.
Okay. This thing might not be on.
I think it's on.
Here, take mine.
Okay. Already starting off strong here, y'all. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaxsen Day. I'm a PhD student at the School of Information. My advisor is Dr. Ken Fleischman, sitting somewhere in the crowd to my left, I believe. And I'm currently working with Mario Guerra and Enterprise Technology. My dissertation research is all about how we make the educational institutions that are serving our students more accessible to students with disabilities. And if I had to sum up AI in one word, it would be flexibility.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Savannah. I am a first-year biology student on the pre-health track, and I'm pursuing a BSA in biology. I've joined the Math AI committee, spearheaded by Professor Bill Woloshinsky. He actually recommended me for this. And I would say my one word that describes my outlook on AI is apprehensive.
Hey everyone, my name is Chibudom Okereke. I am a senior majoring in biomedical engineering and minoring in business and public policy. My major interests in AI are computational medicine, so developing machine learning methods for image analysis, diagnostics tools, as well as looking at AI risks and how we can prevent them from happening in society. I also work at the AI Studio, which is part of Enterprise Technology, and I'm the president and founder of Responsible Intelligence Network, which is a student organization that I started to have conversations around responsible AI principles. One word to describe my outlook on AI is careful, that I'm careful about AI.
Hello, my name is Katherine. I am a senior. I'm from the College of Liberal Arts, and I'm a double major in archaeology and philosophy. Currently, I am working on my senior thesis, and I am also an undergrad TA for an archaeology class, and I am an instruction intern at the Harry Ransom Center. And if I could describe my outlook on AI in one word, I would say cautious.
Great, thank you. What I love about this, maybe it's this mic. I just turned it on. What I love about this panel is the scope right here and the distribution of majors, years here at the university. And so I think it gives us a great opportunity to have a really sort of interesting, diverse, and sort of robust conversation about AI and really kind of how you are beginning to think about AI and its relationship to your own sort of educational and personal development. So maybe a question to start with for each of you is if you could think for a moment about ways in which you are sort of integrating AI into your sort of daily kind of educational sort of experience here at UT. It may be useful, right, for those of us here just to hear some specific examples or an example, and you can illustrate on that example of how you are sort of using AI. Is there a particular platform or tool that you're using? Is there a particular sort of reason or approach or framework that you're using? Maybe give us a glimpse into kind of what your world is like here as a student as you begin to think about and incorporate these tools into your own sort of educational journey.
Okay, let's see. Oh, good, it works now. Casey for the win. So one tool that I use quite frequently as a student is the Atlas web browser. It's a tool by OpenAI that basically integrates their models into your web surfing experience. And the reason why I use that is because it can make web content instantly machine readable for a piece of technology like screen readers. It has become invaluable for navigating complex websites, say journal submission pages. And these are the kinds of small but impactful use cases that can really elevate your educational experience as a disabled student. You have more flexible access to information on the web, even if that website isn't necessarily properly coded to work with assistive technology. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I would say that as a biology student, I have a lot of reservations about the environmental implications of generative AI use, energy use by like data centers, water use. That's all come to my attention and has become a bit of like a cause for concern for me. So honestly, in my everyday life, I really try not to use it that much. I was telling my table over there that I really only use it as like a last resort option kind of for maybe problems that like schoolwork that I can't figure out on my own or can't find like adequate resources for. And even then it's just very, I guess, simple, like limited, like Google Gemini type AI use. So.
I mainly use AI for test prep. I found it very useful. Specific example, one of my business courses was on social corporate responsibility, and throughout the semester we looked at and discussed various like use cases or case studies from like Nestle, OpenAI as well. And before every lecture, we were expected to read through every article and be prepared for discussions, like practice questions, all of that. And I would do that. And then I used AI to support in sort of remembering every case study when it was exams, because essentially it's like you have one exam and the teacher can pull from over 20 articles and pull any questions from those articles and you don't remember. So I found it very useful to put the articles into Notebook LM, that's the specific tool, and it generated podcasts. So just on my way to the exam, literally, I was listening to an AI-generated podcast discussing different case studies, and I felt that it was so much more impactful than just reading it again or just reading like highlights, because it was like listening to a conversation. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I read that. I remember when I read that. And so just like as a final thing in my head before the exam started, it was really helpful.
I'm similar to Savannah, where I primarily try to abstain from using AI. I also am like very concerned about the environmental impact of AI and just the lack of regulation of it. I have used it a couple of times regarding my thesis because I was told like you can use it to help you find sources more effectively. And so I tried to do that because I have like a very, very long list of sources for my thesis. And it was useful in some field, like some subjects, and then not very useful in others. And just because of what I was writing about, I found that it was like not very useful for me personally. But beyond that, I really try not to use AI.
Yeah, I really appreciate each of your perspectives. I think what it illustrates is what a number of us are learning who are in classrooms with you, teaching you, learning from you, sort of evolving with you, right, in this space. And what I've seen, and maybe some of you have seen this as well, is that it's easy to think of students as like a monolith, right, that you all have, one particular position or perspective or approach to using AI, and that could be so far from the truth. And so just as demonstrated here, some of you are a lot more sort of careful, reluctant, last resort sort of use. Others thinking about right ways of sort of using the tool to kind of customize your own kind of learning journey. And we certainly see, evidence of that as well. So I'm going to give you a question that's maybe a little kind of off script, but I think you'll each be fine, so don't panic. Something that's come up in some of the earlier conversations, and one of the sort of frequent issues brought up in terms of AI, and as we begin to sort of adopt and use this technology in a variety of ways, is the sort of the risk that it poses in terms of, some use the term cognitive offloading, others might use the term, right, having AI do the thinking or the work for you. How do you think about this, right? And how do you grapple with that? Do you see that as a threat? If so, why? Are there any strategies that you're sort of developing to sort of mitigate that threat? And I asked this question in part because I remember having a conversation with an undergraduate student a couple of years ago, and she was a employee in our writing center here. And the writing center here is, likely many of you know, but it's where students go to essentially not learn how to write, but to get feedback and support to sort of strengthen their writing. And it's a resource available to students. And she talked about, and this is sort of the early days of all of this, and I say that with some degree of irony, because this is also early. But she talked about a student who came in, had a paper that she was writing, and basically the request was, help me turn this AI-generated content into something that looks like I wrote it. And after a conversation with the student, and this is a student talking to a student, the student employed in the writing center said, basically she realized, right, that the student had really done no research, had not generated or written this paper, really had not even thought about the paper. And her conclusion was, there's nothing that we can do for you here at the writing center because this is not a writing assignment, right, that you're prepared to do, that you've invested in. And so in terms of our resources, right, we are really incapable of providing you with any support. And that was kind of the end of it. Now, I bring that example up, right, because that's sort of, if we fast forward, 2 or 3 years now, does that happen to some degree today? Perhaps likely, but I think less likely, right? I think students are beginning to understand, right, that not only is that not ethical, but I'm hearing from students also concerns about their own sort of cognitive development and their own capacity sort of to navigate this environment in ways that don't diminish your ability to sort of think critically, but in fact enhance your ability to think critically. And so I'm wondering, as you think about your relationship, right, to your own cognition, your own sort of academic development, how are you sort of navigating these tools in light of these kinds of challenges?
Okay, so that was a big one. I guess I'll try to tackle this in stages. The first part of that I think Craig already touched on, which is I don't see AI as a threat to your cognition if you understand how to talk to the AI tool. The example that he gave, the student basically treated the AI like an all-knowing corpus and said, write the paper. What you should be doing is using something like OpenAI's Canvas to actively type the paper and collaborate on certain sections. So it's all about how you're working with the tool. As long as you're involved in the process of creating whatever you're creating, you won't have that super cognitive offload that everyone's afraid of. And that kind of goes into the problem of students and AI literacy. I think too many students treat AI just like a Google search engine, when all of the different models can do so much more than that, but you have to know which models you're engaging with. I'm sure we might talk about that a little bit later.
Great.
I would say at this point, I do view AI as slightly threatening to, students' cognition a little bit. My mom is like a high school teacher. I've heard other stories from high school teachers about students who, kind of like you mentioned, like create entire essays or complete entire assignments using AI only. And in these like formative years where they're learning how to learn and maybe how to prepare for future education, they're not gaining the skills that you need to be a good learner, basically. And I view this as threatening, I guess, for younger generations. And I've seen how it can negatively impact students. So at this point, I do find it to be slightly threatening, I'd say.
I wouldn't say threat. I'd say more, I view it as a disservice to my learning and to my cognition, especially being someone who on the back end creates AI and machine learning tools. I think if I don't actually understand the underlying math, data science, calculus behind these tools. And then, yeah, I just think it's a disservice to myself to not actually know or have a good understanding of what's going on in these tools. And then I think also, aside from my interest, just learning in general, I think coming to university, there's so many aspects of it that all come together to create a great education. And I think part of that is in getting things wrong and seeing how you think and getting feedback from your professors or TAs on this is my reasoning and this is how I think. And it all goes back, like Jaxsen said, to AI literacy, because for me, some things at this point, I already know at the back of my head, like, oh, of course AI generates like fake sources for a paper. But I've been in group work where when I was reading like my teammate's section and I was like, oh, what is this source? And then I found out that OpenAI generated the source that didn't exist. And so it's like, I had to catch that. And there's been so many instances like that, but that's just because through my work, through my org, and through just like personal research, I've really built my AI literacy. And so a lot of students are lacking in that and don't understand the limitations of AI just as a learning tool alone. So that has been very interesting to see from like my peers.
I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
Yeah, I guess mainly, what concerns, if any, do you have about over-reliance on AI in such a way that it diminishes your own ability to sort of think independently, to think critically, to really develop, right, separate from what a machine might generate for you, to be able to develop the capacity, right, to sort of to think and understand and navigate, right, the information environment around you?
I would say I definitely like worry about it. I especially worry about, I would say just like the idea that like students are inclined to kind of use AI, especially like in academics where, you get points off for like not using a comma in the correct spot when like the essay is more about the argument rather than the grammar. So students are definitely like kind of pushed into a box where it's like if you want to do well, you kind of have to produce work that doesn't have many mistakes in them. So I worry a lot about it because of like all the points that all the other panelists made that it does like affect cognition. And I especially worry about just the fact that like students feel like very boxed into using it.
This question is directed to Katherine and Chibudom. So you're both, I think, nearing your time here at UT as students. And so think about ChatGPT, I think 3.5 was released in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And again, this is all happening so rapidly. The tools are developing rapidly. Our relationships with the tools are developing rapidly. Could you give us some perspective on, how your time here at UT, which has kind of coincided, right, with the arrival, of generative AI specifically, how do you think it's changed your sort of academic experience? What kinds of, or if any, conversations are you and your peers having about this technology, and how you grapple with it? I met a student who graduated in the spring of 2022, and she and her peers talk about being like the last generation, right, before the arrival of GPT, and it seems like your arrival here kind of coincided, right, with its flourishing and widespread ability, so I'm just availability. So just wondering, right, how you think about how it changed your experience, how your peers think about that, and to what extent you think it has prepared or not prepared you for your future plans.
For me, I am in a position where I'm obviously a student, but I've also been put in positions where like I'm doing a lot of instruction. Like I said, I'm a TA and I'm an instruction intern for the Hay Ransom Center. And so I've definitely seen a lot of changes in both like peers' attitude and teachers' attitude towards like work, and then like my attitude towards my own work. The best example I could give is as a TA for archaeology, we ask students to like interpret a lot of like significant historical objects, like why is this object significant to like the archaeological record? And so we're basically like asking them to like make their own answer and like make their own interpretations and show us like what they know. And we obviously talk about this in class. And whenever they like take a test and they give an answer that's like not what we have told them in class, both me and like the professor I work with are like automatically skeptical of this answer. And it's not that it's necessarily wrong, but it's that we haven't fed them that information. And so I think it's changed like attitudes towards trying to like think differently from like what you're taught in class. And in humanities specifically, like liberal arts, that is like a big thing, like developing your own ideas. And now with AI, it's like teachers don't want you to. And I've even heard teachers say that like they're so happy whenever they get a paper that's like bad. It's like, this paper was terrible, I know that they wrote it, and I'm so happy, you know? So it kind of also, it works against good quality work done by students who want to do good work, if that makes sense.
Yes, an interesting observation, and it suggests, right, the degree to which these approaches and how instructors think about the technology and their students' use of it could backfire in some ways, right? Because in some ways, it's almost like there's an expectation that students parrot, right, what they've been given in terms of information, as opposed to thinking outside of those parameters, maybe thinking creatively, maybe thinking differently, and now, you know, the suspicion, right, that you know, that something sinister has gone on, right, in terms of AI. And this is oftentimes the elephant in the room, you know, in the classrooms these days, the sort of this interesting dance, right, that's happening between instructors and students, and how we're all sort of trying to sort of navigate that. I still recall from time to time a random email that I got from a parent of a student here at UT who had been accused of academic fraud, basically using AI to sort of complete an assignment by an instructor. And the parent didn't know me, I didn't know the parent. The parent saw some research that I had done and just thought I might be interested. But she essentially sort of explained, right, the sort of pain that she and her family and their child were going through in terms of this whole episode. And so it creates a really interesting sort of environment, right, in which we're all trying to sort of grapple with. And so, you know, this idea, right, of expecting students, right, to sort of think within certain, you know, boundaries is, in some ways, right, is frightening and perhaps runs counter to what we would expect from a higher education institution like this.
My friends and I, like my classmates, are always talking about how it's so crazy that like ChatGPT 3.5 essentially launched, I say my sophomore year. So I got like a little taste of pre-ChatGPT college. And I would say honestly, it's honestly been a crazy change. A lot of times, so from my perspective, like I said, like with group work and just seeing people's over-reliance on it, and then it makes me wonder, like, so in their individual assignments, like, are they doing the same thing? Like, do they carry over that practice? And in that case, like, are they being penalized for it? I'm not going to tell the professor because I caught it in our group work and changed it. But if they continue this practice, then, like, does that show up in their individual assignments? And one of my favorite things is to, like, talk with my professors about how learning and teaching is so different now. And I remember one professor saying, so it's a coding class, but our exams are handwritten in class. And it's always been like that, at least when I took it pre-ChatGPT. And he was saying how ever since ChatGPT has been released and just AI is so rampant in learning, that he's actually had instances where he puts the exact homework question in an exam, and so many people who got the code correct in the homework couldn't even like answer it in the exam setting on their own. And to me, that's just crazy. And so when I hear stories like that, I'm almost grateful that I had a little bit of college so that I also started to build that personal, you know, perseverance and being okay with making mistakes and reaching out for help. So building that attitude with AI, I think that a lot of that has kept me through in maintaining my personal approach to how I use it. And so on the professor side or on the teacher side, a lot of them are trying to restructure their teaching. Like I know some of them have made take-home homework optional because they're like, at this point, I just know most of you are going to use AI. I've had professors say that, and so they're like, there's no point. Some have implemented in-person exams, and a lot of my classes still have in-person exams, so in a lot of cases, like, my personal use of it hasn't changed that much from when I first started using it. I still don't trust it blindly. I already know it hallucinates and struggles with complex engineering problems. Sometimes simple math, it just gets it wrong. So that, I built that mindset already, and I would say that has carried me through. But just my observation of students who started off college with AI already being so big in learning, I think it is a bit alarming.
Yeah, and I was thinking exactly this last point that you just made, and really how striking it is, right? I mean, you're all relatively, similar in terms of age, but that 2, 3, 4 year window could make a significant difference, right, in terms of your orientation, your exposure to, experience with these tools. And so at the end of the table, right, graduating seniors, I think, right, and then first year, and then graduate student, right, so suggesting, right, that there's some very interesting sort of dynamics happening here. Savannah, I'm wondering from your perspective, and Jaxsen, from your perspective as a graduate student, Savannah, as a first-year student, right, just curious about what was your exposure to and engagement with generative AI in high school, and to what extent has that prepared or not prepared you for how you are navigating and adapting to the AI environment, starting college? And then Jaxsen, for you, I sort of liken your situation in some ways similar to my situation years ago with the arrival of the internet, the arrival of Google, and how most of my professors, right, those were sort of new tools, right, and new tools that in some ways threaten the old ways of doing academic work, doing research, our relationship to knowledge and information, and we're certainly, right, at a similar moment here today. So just curious, right, from just not too far from high school, transitioning to UT, sort of what that transition has looked like for you, and then Jaxsen as a PhD student, how are you finding these tools as a resource or an asset for how you're thinking about your PhD and the way in which you sort of navigate those expectations? Savannah?
Okay. Yeah, in high school, I earned an associate's degree, so for a lot of my high school courses, I wasn't very inclined to use AI just because, I don't know, I guess I felt like I didn't need to. I feel like the workload wasn't super rigorous or anything that I needed to get a lot of extra help from. And then even in college courses, I only really remember using AI in a general chemistry class I took. And really even that, it was just for the lab, just because that was extra hard. But yeah, I think I watched my peers use it, and even then I wasn't super inclined to use it. And that's kind of transferred now to how I don't feel super inclined to use it still, so.
Okay. Well, clearly I'm the contrarian, so I guess I'll just keep going down on that path here. So as I said previously, these technologies are unlocking new ways of navigating the digital space and interacting with digital information. That being said, we've talked a lot about the fears and issues around AI in education. I'm going to echo something that was said in a previous session up here. All I see is opportunity. We've identified the problems. Now we can have richer conversations, build better assessments, and figure out what these tools can actually help us offload versus what we, the humans, should be focused on. There are so many things I could talk about here, but it all goes back to the AI literacy piece of it. Even if you're scared of AI, even if you're not quite sure how it works or have experimented with it, every student, for example, should know what an API key is. Every student should have seen that UT landing page that tells you what data you can use inside the enterprise tools and what is safe and what is not. Understanding these tools a little bit better in just terms of basics on how they work, will demystify some of these fears and help us discover what we should not use the technology for and what we can use it for to build a better educational experience.
Let me sort of follow up really quickly, Jaxsen. Any thoughts about what the mechanism might be to help students with that orientation? So I can imagine some students don't even know that that exists. And so any thoughts about, the best way to sort of make that available to them, to encourage, engage them around some of those considerations that obviously play a significant role in terms of orienting them and helping them to develop some foundational literacy in terms of how they think about these tools?
Oh, excellent. Well, I have thought about this a bit, and this is just blue sky thinking. But Ken's class in AI ethics actually gave me this idea a little bit when I TA'd for him. But what if we made the class even more applied than the AI ethics classes? What I mean by that is, hey, I'm going to give you a very simple academic assignment, and I'm going to structure it in a way where you as the student are not only encouraged to use AI to see if you can complete the assignment, but as part of the assignment, you are required to tell me, the instructor, how you used it. And we have check-ins about it so I can watch your process. And through that engagement of doing, you will actually learn as the student what the tools are good for and what they're not good for and how you can ethically use them. I'm still in the formative stages of thinking through that, but that's a good way to engage. The other good way to engage is just get the awareness out there of the enterprise tools, of UT's guidance on what's safe to put in the tool and what isn't. Because I think right now that information is just not disseminated, and it needs to be.
Right.
Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Savannah, you mentioned this earlier, and it's quite impressive, right, that your first year here, you're sitting on a committee with faculty in the math department who are basically, I guess, kind of undergoing some process to sort of think about AI use, its application within the math department curriculum. Could you share with us maybe like a couple of issues that are emerging or points of conversation that you and that committee are having about AI, its impact on students, the future development of the curriculum, et cetera?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of discussions about permitted AI use for courses, like what is allowed and what is like not allowed in courses. I know that sometimes even as somebody who doesn't use AI that often, I've heard from other students like maybe more transparency on what it is okay to use AI for and what it is not okay to use AI for would be beneficial. Yeah, I've heard students like write papers and they use these little like aspects that people usually flag as like, oh, ChatGPT wrote that, like I think an M dash or little stuff like that. And they have this fear about like, okay, will my thing be like flagged or will my paper be flagged as AI generated? Or I've also had like questions about, okay, is it okay to use AI for this assignment? In statistics, like I've heard that maybe it's okay to use it like to generate code, to make like a graph or something, but there are just little discrepancies that I think would be beneficial to get figured out. So like when it's okay to use AI in courses and when it's not, and I know that differs from course to course as well. And then I'd say the other concern is a more like individual course-based professor thing, which is whether or not AI use would even be beneficial for that specific course. I've had courses where, like chemistry or calculus, where if you put in a question, a very complicated question in ChatGPT, like you said before, like it might give you the wrong answer, and in that way you can be led astray. But also courses with more like generalized and more like easily accessible information, where you might get a right answer, or you might be able to create something that can like help you study for future tests or anything. So I think another issue is for each class, whether or not the professor themselves recommends AI use for the course material.
Jaxsen, you gave some examples earlier, so if you have other ones, feel free to share. But you walk a really interesting balance in terms of being a student, graduate student, PhD work, but then you also have served as a TA, so you wear an instructional hat as well. As you think about that sort of instructional, experience, is there anything that you haven't had a chance to share or note about how you see your students responding to this environment, and what do you think is important from an instructional perspective in terms of supporting students to be able to better navigate and integrate these tools into their learning journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my fellow panelists have covered most of what I've heard from students, and the primary question that I've heard back when I was TAing and this stuff was just coming to fruition is the simple question, can we use it? And I think back at that time, I at least hadn't experimented with it to the point where I understood how to answer that question correctly, so I would query Ken and some other knowledgeable people on how to answer it. But now that I've had some time to really learn about it, that is why I am kind of excited about the possibility of building some sort of literacy course, where the whole point is, we know you're using AI for these assignments because we put it in there. Now we're going to watch what you're doing and teach you how to use this safely and correctly, so that we build in some of that positive behavior and get rid of the behavior of, oh, we're just going to treat the AI like Google and immediately trust the answer.
Yeah, this is, it sort of, I think, illustrates a really interesting dilemma, right, that's emerged in terms of this technology, how it's landed in higher education, how you're experiencing it, how faculty are experiencing it, staff are experiencing it. I mean, for some students, right, the reluctance to use it, right, is in part, I think, inspired by, they only seem to understand these tools, right, as tools that can help you cheat or commit fraud. And I think in some ways, right, that sort of failure of imagination and ability to understand that there's so much more that you can do with these tools, I think part of that sort of lands on us in terms of the narratives that we've constructed, the way in which this has been framed from the very beginning, right? And many of you likely remember this too. Literally remember, right, that the day or two after ChatGPT was released, a lot of the news story, right, was immediately about sort of the knee-jerk reaction to academic fraud, students cheating, and sort of banning students' access to these tools. Now, within a relatively short period of time, right, a few months or so, certainly within a year, a number of educators began to sort of rethinking that, right, and which is in part why we're here today, and sort of understanding that these are not tools that you should be keeping students away from, but in fact you should be creating technology, creating an environment, creating ethics, frameworks, et cetera, that help students learn how to use these tools effectively, agentically, and in ways that empower their own sort of interests, motivations, and pathways. So as you think about some of the challenges that are emerging around this technology, I'm wondering if so there's so many different opportunities, so many different challenges. We're going to talk about the opportunities here in a second, but is there one thing about, so a lot of your one words were apprehension, careful, things of this nature. Could maybe each of you share like one specific reason why you find yourself being either hesitant, reluctant, or careful about AI? And it could be, things that we've sort of alluded to earlier. We haven't talked much. I mean, I think you've talked a bit about the environment. There's certainly, right, other issues that emerge with these technologies in terms of the quality of the information that's generated. I think it was mentioned, right, just generating fake sources, for instance, that don't exist. As a student, but also, right, just as a person, right, sort of navigating this space. If there's one thing that you might flag, right, that you would want this room to understand about, what hesitation or reservations you have about the technology, that we should take into consideration, right, as we continue to build systems, as we continue to build spaces in which you will inhabit as you sort of move forward in your own sort of personal academic journeys. Katherine, maybe we start with you.
I would say the biggest reason that I'm so cautious is, well, keep in mind I am like liberal arts. A lot of like what we are asked to do is like argue and other things. I feel like beyond academia, it has the potential to just like affect your ability to interact with other people, which is very important in academia. So like a lot of students come to college, they use ChatGPT to write all their essays. They don't really spend time like just developing their arguments just entirely on their own. And then they have to go and interact with their professors and interact with their fellow classmates. And I've seen a lot of students just be like very nervous, and also nervous when like teachers like press them for more information about their thoughts. And it's just because they haven't developed the skill of just like thinking of something and being able to articulate it just like immediately. And I feel like it also affects, it will eventually affect higher education like master's and PhD programs, because a lot of people in liberal arts are eventually wanting to go to programs like that, and a big part of it is developing relationships with your professors, with people in different academic orgs, with your fellow students. And a lot of students in the classes that I teach and in the classes that come and visit the Renson Center, they just don't know how to talk to me well, and they don't know how to interact with their fellow students well.
I say I'm careful with AI, specifically in designing AI, because if I'm not careful, then I can't expect other people to be. So as I mentioned before, my background in AI was more from medical and biomedical applications. And at first, I was very excited by the tool. Like, I remember my first internship creating a machine learning tool to diagnose cardiac disease, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I think I did that before I even used ChatGPT. And so then I was like, oh, this is like that thing, kind of just AI machine learning everyone's talking about. And it is a very exciting application, very exciting tool, but at the same time, there are so many like ethical dilemmas that come up with it, like in a lot of research and just a lot of tools that after they were published, then it's like, oh, it doesn't really predict well for minority groups, or it doesn't take into consideration socioeconomic factors. And so because of that, I have this like personal belief in if I am in the room with people designing these tools and developing these tools, then I should be careful and I should care about the people that it could affect.
I would say that most of, like I mentioned before, most of the apprehension that I have about AI use comes from like the environmental and like social concerns. I think, Katherine, what you mentioned about like the disruption sort of in communication and how like that tying back to the cognitive kind of decline, I think that was really interesting. And yeah, I've heard stories before of individuals who live in areas near like energy sources or like data centers experiencing higher levels of like pollution and possibly like adverse health effects. And a lot of these people are like minorities and disadvantaged people. So I guess as a pre-health student, I find that to be concerning, that in the development of AI, we are actively harming, or I guess in some areas, actively harming some people. So yeah, I would find that to be pretty concerning. I will say on the other hand though, especially like with a lot of what you've said, I do think it can be effective for like students and learning. I know on the AI committee, a lot of the professors talk about UT Sage, and a lot of the like math courses here, or just courses in general, are difficult, and I can see that being helpful for students. So yeah, I guess I've been open to a more supportive approach to AI use.
That makes sense to me. One thing that I'd say I'm careful of on a practical note is if you're using the AI for any sort of research activity, understanding a corpus of knowledge, locating certain online resources, be very careful when the model changes. Because when the model updates or changes, and if you're operating under the assumption that the AI is Google, that's when you get the garbage answers. What you want to do is feed the AI a corpus of information that you know already very well, and then see if the models are behaving the same with that corpus of information before you trust your outputs. So the thing that I would be cautious of, to sum it up, is the fact that the models are being updated all of the time. And we need to build in those practices to double check the information it's giving us, and that is possible.
Interesting, thank you. So as we've established already, you are each at very different stages of the academic journey. One of the obvious threats that this technology presents is its impact on the economy and its impact on the future of work. And this has come up, I think, in some of the earlier conversations here. But I'm always interested to sort of think about how you specifically feel about this conversation. I remember maybe 7 years ago, it was certainly before the pandemic, which is 2020. Occasionally, my students coming in and sort of with that kind of worried look in their face, concerned about, literally asking me, when I graduate, will I have a job, in the future? And that was 6 or 7 years ago, right? And that conversation has only accelerated and intensified. So I guess it'd be interesting, right, to hear you each reflect on, to what degree do you think about that? To what degree is that a concern? And if so, have you thought about, or how are you trying to sort of mitigate what you perceive to be a challenge moving forward as you think about your own professional and employment opportunities?
I don't know who goes first.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if we were starting down there or over here again, my bad. I would say that there is, a degree to which we have to be cautious, because at some point, AI will come for certain jobs. I think we've seen that in the news recently, where some technology companies tried to fire a bunch of their development team, realized the AI was making mistakes, and then go, wait, come back and watch the AI, don't leave us, never mind. So I think on that front, the fears that we're already experiencing in terms of AI bode well for the stability of the overall job market later. Because so many people have had these negative experiences, we as a community and as a society will be very careful as to what we outsource to AI writ large, or at least I hope so. So while some jobs may be automated away at some point, I think the human element is not going away anytime soon because of those fears that we've already identified and experienced as a community.
Great, thanks. Savannah?
Yeah, I agree with Jaxsen that if, I guess, AI does take over some jobs, it will probably be a long time before that happens because of the fears that we've mentioned today. I think personally, looking to go into a healthcare career, I don't have the most fear that, I guess, the job that I want to pursue will be taken over by AI, just because I guess healthcare is a very human experience, and I don't think that an AI system could replicate what I could possibly give to a patient in the future. So I guess there's fear there, but at the moment, I don't feel personal fear for myself.
I think as someone who's graduating, what I try and do is, as much as possible, understand what companies are looking for in terms of who they keep and who they don't replace by AI. Well, number one, I also don't necessarily think AI will replace like a lot of jobs. I think there's that prediction that it will, but my prediction is sort of like the situation Jaxsen mentioned, is you take people out of it and then you see like the issues that come up and then you put people back. But I think on a smaller scale, there will be roles and there will be teams maybe like scaled down and maybe 1 or 2 people are replaced by an AI tool. And yeah, I just try and research and just conversations with people who are working, especially like in tech and biotech firms. It's like, how do you, as a human, stand out to a firm so they want to keep you on? And I don't have all the answers to that. And I'm going to grad school, so I guess I've delayed that fear by a few years, but it's generally something I think about. I mean, every day the headline is like, this number of people laid off, this is the worst job market in the US a year. So it's discouraging for sure. And I think that's something that maybe from higher education can also step up in, because in a lot of classes you have professors being like, don't use AI at all, don't use it for anything, or maybe designing assignments in a way that you can't use AI. But then you get out into the job market and a lot of firms are demanding you know how to use AI, and if you don't, I've heard situations where like if you don't incorporate AI, then you're let go. So it's like it's a skill that people are looking for. I think also for the protection of the workers, like if you can show that I'm using it to enhance my creativity, but I'm still vital to this team, that's really important for students in college to start to understand how they can navigate that in the workforce. So, like I said, coming to the end of my college career and just with the timeline of AI boom, it's a lot of things that I've just tried to learn on my own and speaking with people that are already working.
Yeah.
My main consideration about AI and the workforce is I'm lucky to be in a field where AI doesn't really seem to be affecting it much beyond like implementing it usefully. So I mostly am concerned with what skills do I now have to develop after I graduate so that I can like catch up with the field. But you know, I do archaeology. I want to go into cultural resource management, and so far the AI can't dig holes in the ground, so I'm okay.
Future proof. No, this is really interesting. You know, it suggests that, you know, there's obviously, right, a lot of dimensions, right, to this conversation, and understandably, right, the sort of intense focus on the future of work, you know, AI coming for our jobs. But, you know, I think an equally compelling, you know, outcome that we're beginning to see some evidence of is not so much AI taking away jobs, but AI changing, right, the way that we do our jobs. And so, which will likely require, right, to the point that many of you are making here, each of you, in fact, that there's certain skills, right, and capacities and intuitions that will be required, right, to sort of use these tools in ways that maintain, right, the human value in a world increasingly sort of filled with machines. So maybe as a final question before we turn to the audience for a little bit of Q&A, imagine you had a chance, well, you do have a chance. You have people in the room who are doing this work, who are building systems, who are building curriculum, who are in some ways, right, trying to scaffold what the student experience might look like in relationship to these technologies. If there's one thing that you might suggest, right, that faculty, that UT, that those building these tools consider or keep in mind as it relates to your own sort of development, your own preparation, your own ability, right, to sort of walk out the doors of UT, feeling like you're confident about how you use these technologies. What's the one thing you would recommend or suggest to those in the room who may have some decision-making authority over what these tools might look like for students? What those tools might look like, what kinds of skills you think will be important to develop, just any words of advice or suggestions that you might make to the room here. And Katherine, how about we start with you?
I would say the biggest thing that I think would be useful to teach students, and I think Jaxsen was kind of hinting on this, like it is true that if I knew more about AI, I would probably be a little less afraid of it. So I think that like teaching students exactly what AI is, and then also like discernment, like how does someone discern between AI doing the work for you and AI being supplemental? Like when does using AI to like brainstorm something turn into AI just like doing the work for you? I think that's a very useful skill, and I also feel like it would apply well in the job field because there are instances where AI like just messes up. Like being able to recognize like when AI is useful is just a very important skill, and would also make students like me more comfortable with the idea of AI coming into like my workplace and my classroom.
One skill I would say is explainability. So, and for me, that's like in two parts. First is understanding, first of all, your domain knowledge and having a good understanding of that. And so I think faculty and just curriculum can not, I think a lot of faculty are starting to feel like, is this even worth this if like students are just so using AI for all these things that they're not supposed to. But I think instead of that, faculty should actually head in the direction of really going deeper into domain knowledge, and that way like the students have a really good understanding of their field and the way AI is applied, and they can also start to understand or make inferences about what the AI tool is doing. And then the second part of that, I would say, is communication. And so being able to take some internal technology concept and communicate that to different stakeholders. And that's, one is necessary to build human trust, because if I ask someone, oh, how does your tool work? And they can tell me, and that tool like has a really big impact on my life, then I already have like very little trust of them, and that could also then affect just like people's perceptions of AI in general. So I think just like if you're going into using AI in your job and communicating that to stakeholders, your customers, your shareholders, your boss, whoever, being able to translate that and knowing how to speak to it. So I think that also pulls in like strategic communications, business courses, just how do you language these things to people so they understand. And it also helps with when incidents come up, you know, you can sort of walk through what exactly happened. And if you, once again, if you understood what was going on and you were able to test it for yourself, then when you're also explaining that to people, that you know what you're talking about. And I think in college, a good way to do that is sort of like interrogating students. So if there's a way where like AI is implemented in an assignment, I guess some professors already do that, but they sort of do it when maybe if you were flagged for cheating and they ask you to come in and explain what this meant if you didn't. But my approach is more just like, if you use AI, if you use these tools, being able to interrogate what went wrong, and you can have someone like a professor or TA who can speak, has more domain knowledge than you and can be like, okay, this isn't actually what happened, or this is what happened. And they can also maybe call out your bluff when they ask you to explain something, but not like, once again, not in a I thought you cheated way, but just in teaching you how to build the skills to communicate with people how your tool works.
I would say that transparency to me would be the biggest thing that I would, I guess, ask of the university. Transparency on, I guess, when students should or should not use AI. And I think if some sort of system could be put in place to discuss with actual students and like the careers that they want to go into, maybe the likelihood that I guess AI will be integrated into that future career, or it could possibly be, I guess, replaced by AI. Specific discussions with students about what their job outlook looks like in that way, I could also find pretty beneficial. So transparency overall.
I would say the recommendation I would make, we've already started down that path, even with meeting in a room like this. I think the biggest thing for us now is creating spaces where the students and the faculty have a chance to get together and discuss the literacy problems of these systems, and figuring out how we can leverage the educational environment to both enrich the education experience overall, as well as mitigate some of the fears we've talked about today, and figure out how we can use these tools to build a richer educational experience. And we've already started down that path, but I think we can do so much more together.
Great. Awesome, thank you. So I think we have some time for Q&A. So if there are any questions for our student panelists, this would be a great time to ask them.
quite enriching panel. Thank you. I'm curious about your experience about how conversations between students and teachers have changed pre and post AI, as well as how consumption of other sources of knowledge, libraries in particular, have changed pre and post AI.
Is that to the students? Yeah.
Okay, so I would think, let's tackle the libraries question first, because I think the libraries question is quite interesting. One of the things that I've discovered with AI, as I previously mentioned, it will help you navigate digital spaces. If you understand, for instance, how the UT library databases organize their information, you know that if you're off campus, you access the databases through something called an easy proxy system. If you understand that, you can build an agent for yourself that helps you navigate the library database discovery layer in a more accessible manner to things like a screen reader. And before anyone asks, that's not to say that you're bypassing your credentials as a student, entering in your NetID, password, whatever. You're still doing that, but the AI is allowing you to explore university resources in a much faster way now, as long as you know how to build the program and query the system. In terms of discussions between students and faculty, I'm actually curious, are you thinking of a particular facet? Are you thinking of the academic honesty portion? Are you thinking of how they ask you questions of your content? I feel like that might be a little useful.
Well, I think two things. One is in terms of how often do you engage, and what kind of questions do you ask now? Is there any difference in the nature of questions that you would ask?
Well, yes, I think particularly, let's go for the fun part. Let's go for the learning aspect, right? If I'm an instructor and I know that my students are using generative AI to engage with my content in some form, I'm going to hope and somewhat expect that they talk to the content, I'll use that phrase, talk to it a little more, and come back to my discussion section with deeper questions. If you know what you're doing with something like, say, a voice mode module, you can really have the opportunity to engage with academic material. And the faculty-student experience, especially in terms of a discussion section, can be enriched because the students are able to engage with something that is talking back at them about the material, even when they don't have access to their teacher. And so when they come back into class, there is an opportunity there to have richer discussions and build better assessments around the material.
Thanks for the discussion so far. I'm Morgan Fong in computer science, and I teach one of the intro courses that I think was mentioned, where we have difficulties around academic integrity. I think I love the ideas that were presented so far around having more connections with students, potentially checking in with them more often. But unfortunately for me, that doesn't quite scale with the size of the classes that I teach, and especially the introductory level where LLMs can just do it so much better, even if I have conversations with students around AI usage. So I think I'm just hoping to get some ideas from y'all around how you might think different ways that we as instructors can restructure our courses, keeping in mind scale and also keeping in mind more introductory level content.
Yeah, it's a great question. And what it points to, right, is the nuances of how we, respond to this technology and what its capabilities are. I hadn't thought about this a lot, right, because I teach different levels of courses, more graduate and sort of upper division courses, not so much the intro courses where they tend to be larger number of students. the content, to your point, is more introductory. It seems like, in situations like that an AI support tool of some kind, if not a tutor, but maybe just an agent, right, that's there to answer like some kind of basic questions, logistical questions about the class, about an assignment, things that you could feel relatively comfortable, right, with an AI agent or some type of AI system responding to students in that way as a proxy for you instead. But if it gets into more content issues, right, in terms of them thinking about ideas, having really interesting questions, needing, right, some deeper kind of conversation, deeper engagement, then maybe, sort of drawing some lines of distinction between kind of when and under what circumstances you might make an AI system or an agent available, right, in a classroom or instructional environment like that. But it suggests, right, that we're all kind of in a position now where we're sort of learning kind of, the fine line here, learning when to sort of, turn these tools up, when to turn them down. I was at a meeting where a lot of sort of stakeholders were there, a lot of the folks representing the big AI labs were there, and had an interesting conversation with the manager from Anthropic, and he had sort of suggested, right, in one of his panel conversations, right, that what Anthropic and most of the large sort of AI companies are really interested in doing is sort of building the most capable technology ever, deployed everywhere, such that AI becomes indistinguishable, right, from the world in which we sort of move around in. And to me, that's a really sort of profound statement for so many reasons that we can't get into here and now. But what it suggests, right, is that we will all need to develop our own kind of governance sort of mechanisms, our own sort of strategies about how we sort of navigate a world where AI just becomes like omnipresent, right, and just everywhere. And so in this sense, right, sort of thinking about how you deploy AI in a very particular kind of instructional environment with students who may have very different kinds of expectations from the instructor, very different needs from the instructor, and how you sort of customize, right, the AI experience for them based on that.
Hi, I'm a psychologist, and I work a lot with young people, teens and young adults, and AI comes up a lot, and my wife and I have 3 sons, 22, 19, and 14, and I'm interested in, y'all shared your views of AI and some reservations about it. If you could guess what, on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being very favorable views toward AI and 0 being like, this is horrible, guess what, like, let's say the student body of UT, what it would rank 0 to 10. I sort of got a feel for where you as individuals might fall, but if you just had to guess, I'm curious as to the attitudes of young people toward AI as a whole.
I think it's hard to say for the entire UT student body because it's not a monolith. And I think even within one individual, they could find themselves being really excited for AI or about AI and its progress. But then maybe if they consider things like it getting so good that it takes their job, that can then like lower their perception on it. So I think it's hard to say. I think it also largely depends on the field the students is in. I think generally, like some fields have more reservations about it than others. So I generally can't say. I think like one thing that I've seen with leading a student org about responsible AI and having conversations with students from different schools and different years, that it really varies. And people and students are thinking about it so many different ways, honestly.
I would say that, I guess as a student in the College of Natural Sciences, again, like I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of the people I've interacted with have a like very positive view of AI. On your like scale, I would probably rank it like a 7 or 8 or something. A lot of people I know use it for studying purposes, but I also know people who use it for things that are a little more concerning to me. Yeah, I've worked in group projects, like you mentioned, where people completely like use AI generated material for their like entire portion of the project, and that's concerning, definitely. But yeah, a lot of the science students that I've interacted with have a very positive view of AI use.
So I think there may be another way to answer that question, which is, it depends on the generation of younger person you're talking to. There was a time when the internet was brand new and everyone didn't know what to do about the internet. But for those individuals who grow up where the internet already exists, they have a very different view of the internet than, say, somebody who remembers the world without it. And so I think if we look at it generationally, pardon me, we're going to get some very different answers. But I would say, at least based on the experiences of the fellow panelists and some other discussions that I've had around the topic, the scale that you mentioned is pretty much split straight down the middle right now.
So I think we're wrapping up. How about a hand of applause for our wonderful students?